Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready.
Okay, we're back with more Live from the Heartland. This is number 134 since the beginning of the pandemic. And we're going to bring on my friend Ivan Handler now. And I'll repeat what I said at the outset of the show because he didn't hear me say it. I've been getting all kind of emails from him over the years, and one of them recently said the critical importance of biodiversity and why it's being ignored in favor of climate change. So I said, let's do a thing. And then I read, and I'm going to read this, about the most recent top 15 that was held in Montreal. It said nearly 200 countries have signed off on an agreement that embeds the promotion of human rights and the rights of nature into a plan to protect and restore biodiversity through 2013. It's a 14-page document, the 12-day conference under the auspices of the UN Convention of Biological Diversity. It is the first international agreement to give credence to a growing movement that recognizes that nature and everything it encompasses, from animal and plant species to rivers, mountains, and the soil, possess inherent rights similar to those of human beings. The accord is therefore being hailed by some environmentalists as a watershed moment. Mentions of human rights, indigenous peoples' rights, local communities' rights, and gender equality are also threaded throughout the document, making a shift from past biodiversity agreements that skirted the human rights issue. Okay, that's a lot in one chunk, but it's pretty clear. We're moving in a good direction. Whether or not it'll come to be, we're going to hear what Ivan Handler has to say. Good morning to you, my brother. Actually,
hey.
Afternoon.
How you doing, Michael? Good to see you.
I'm having a great day.
That's good. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. I haven't been over there since you were helping me print some photographs a couple of years back, and it won't be long till I'll probably be back over there.
Okay, yeah, well, that's good. I've got to get back into that. I've been trying to reduce the number of things I'm doing as I'm getting older.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the biodiversity thing is actually very important. There's some very good things in it, but there's a lot of things missing, and I think that's one of the problems. The governments have been making these agreements for years and not living up to them. And that's one of the problems in these things. It's nice to have these agreements, but there's no way to actually enforce them. And based on past history, it just seems like this is going to be more glad-handing, getting pats on the back. We need a lot more. It's not that the things that they agree to are bad. I don't think they're sufficient, but they're, good things, especially the rights of not just humans, but of living beings. I think that's very important.
Salamanders.
Yeah, everything, bacteria, viruses, everything that's alive needs to have some support. But I think the problem is that, especially in the West, we divide things up between economics, politics, science and research, agriculture. We have all these different boundaries. These boundaries are, in fact, not natural. If you look at ecosystems, everything's integrated. There aren't those kinds of boundaries. And I claim that one of the reasons we're in this crisis of destroying the biosphere, the human-supporting biosphere, is because we've imposed these boundaries. And these boundaries have been imposed primarily so we could have more control. And in particular, because of the kind of economies we have, we can make more profits. There's no way that I can see that we can have a biodiverse planet that supports human life and these kinds of boundaries, large tracts of land being dedicated to either people living or for agriculture. They don't make any sense. They don't make sense ecologically. And in fact, as far as I understand, aside from Western culture, most cultures never actually adapted this craziness. This is something that has arisen from the West, from this very individualistic approach. The Bible puts it up in the Genesis. We're God gave us the planet to do with whatever we want to do with it, and we unfortunately have. So
well, that's too bad. I actually, I think there was some resistance from certain countries, like Democratic Republic of the Congo and a number of other places. One of the issues is if we're going to make any steps toward whether it be in climate change or improving biodiversity, who's going to pay for it? And a lot of these places that have been impacted by the industrialization of the Western world, mostly, they're saying who's going to pay for it, and they held out, but they got some concessions. This is not the first convention that dealt with this.
No.
There have been a number of them, and I don't know where we're going forward. Why don't you start by talking a little bit about what is biodiversity and what is climate change, and you counterpose them. I think obviously we're going to have to work on both of them.
Yes, no, I don't think they're counterposed. It's just I think that there's a misunderstanding that's going around, so that if we manage to keep the global temperature average below 1.5 degrees centigrade from where it was about 100 years ago, that things will be okay. And the reality is they won't.
I don't think there's some people saying that things are not going to be okay no matter what we do. We've gone too far. We've lost it.
I think that's a good possibility. I'm of the approach that opinion that we need to be optimistic, and we need to fight, assuming that we can survive. But we're in extreme danger. There's no question we're in extreme danger. But let's talk about biodiversity. Let me just read something that I think is really good. So Vandana Shiva is one of the most important of the advocates for what's called regenerative agriculture, and a lot of really important things happening in India right now. But her definition of biodiversity, I think, is really good. It's in this book, Agroecology and Regenerative Agriculture. It's by Vandana Shiva, and she's really a great person and does a lot of work in this area. So she says, biodiversity represents the variety of plants, animals, and microorganisms in the world, along with their ecological functions and the relationships between them. The higher the diversity and the more multidimensional its ecological functions, the more stable and sustainable the system is, and the higher the goods and services it can provide. So that's biodiversity. What I want to do is point out that biodiversity comes about because of natural selection. And natural selection is what Darwin pointed out was the way that life, it's actually is life. It's the way that life evolves. So natural selection has two important components that relate to biodiversity. The first component is variation. Living beings live in populations that are diverse. None of us are identical to each other. We all have, even though a lot of similarities have variation built in, none of our genetic genes are ever exactly a match. So there's this enormous amount of variation. And then there's something called selection. What selection means is the creatures, the populations evolve in ways that are the most advantageous for them. I guess that's the best way to put it. So that not everything survives. And what happens as a result is that the actual frequencies of different components in a population vary over time. That's what evolution is. The problem, so biodiversity, therefore, is about natural selection. It's about improving the diversity of life so that selective pressures can come down and keep things moving forward. The problem with the way that we do agriculture in particular, but the way we look at the world, is that we look at the world through these very narrow lenses that come about through our technology, and that is not diverse at all. And particularly with agriculture, we have the problem of what's called monocultures. So in normal, if you look at a lot of non-Western cultures, you will see all kinds of polyculture, different plants and animals being grown together in a sustainable way. When you get to the West, all of a sudden, you have these huge tracts of land, monocultures, you destroy diversity, And when you destroy diversity, you're attacking the basis of life to reproduce itself. So biodiversity is critical. We can't survive without it. And the relationship with climate change is the following. First off, climate change also hurts biodiversity, right? I mean, as temperatures get wilder, going either hotter or colder, as the weather changes, the kinds of adaptations that have already happened get hurt. And that's problematic and scary. So that's one of the critical things to understand about biodiversity and climate change. Biodiversity, I mean, climate change is going to be dealt with. I'm convinced that we're going to have eventually renewable energy, whether it's the kind of renewable energy we want, whether it's going to be technology intensive, which also causes environmental damage, or we move it to a more biologically based one. I'm not sure. But climate change can be, I believe, addressed in some kind of way. Biodiversity, in the last 200 years, the last 50 years, we've done so much damage to biodiversity, it will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years before that comes back. Biodiversity is a bigger problem. Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about, there's a lot of talk about how many species are disappearing every year. Clearly, it's a problem. And so if you are correct, and I hope you are, that we'll figure a way to deal with climate change in some form or fashion. That doesn't necessarily address biodiversity. Think about the clearing of the rainforest in Brazil, which has been an issue. How much clearing has been done, and at what points does it make a kind of a qualitative leap so that you cannot bring it back or you cannot recreate it? I'm reminded of our friend who's been on the show, and many of you out there who listen to the show have eaten some of the buffalo that was raised by Wild Idea Buffalo, a guy named Dan O'Brien. And one of the things that attracted me to him when we at the Heartland were selling buffalo meat, the one mean buffalo burger, which was our largest, item on the menu, was he talked about bringing back the buffalo and he did it on his ranch that he had. The buffalo pound the earth. It brings back more grasses, more insects, more birds, more small animals. It recreates the prairie, and so if you look online under buffalo, there's a lot of people raising buffalo, a lot of people trying to do the good thing, but that's just an example of a step that could help protect biodiversity or bring it back. But I don't know of other ways to do it and what's out there. What do you got?
Well, that's what I think is critical. But I think, my view is Gaia, the global ecology, is not just an ecological model, it's a social model. We need to reorganize
Gaia. Tell people about Gaia again.
So Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, who was married to Carl Sagan at one time, came up with this idea that the planet itself is a self-regulating superorganism. Now, some scientists will get back and forth around this, but I think at least from a conceptual point of view, that's how we should see, when we talk about Mother Earth, that's what we're talking about, as a system that's cohesive and integrated. What we have in human culture is systems that are disaggregated, at competing with each other, polluting the planet. It's the wrong model. The social model is the right model, but that means no more big farms. It means, we've got to have small little farms, small farmers coming back. We need communities. We need to start building communities, and including in the city. I'm big on urban agriculture. I think we need more of that. We need local ecologies in the city. Why not bring the prairie back to Chicago? I mean, in some ways, they're starting to do that. If you look at the prairie restoration in Montrose, which I love, we need a lot more of that. And we need to start focusing on ecological concepts, small communities, small little integrated environments that ally with each other. I mean, it's a big problem. One of the things you may not know, my friend Harry Rhodes, who was the executive director of Growing Home, He's now working in actually with farm animals. He went to Cuba about 10 years ago. In Cuba right now, half of the produce that they eat in Cuba, in Havana, is grown in Havana. Some of that started because Dick Levins and Science for the People in the 70s went down to Cuba because they were obviously hurting and trying to figure out a way to help them produce food. So that's an example of the kinds of things that we need to do. It's not at all enough. And that's the other thing I want to mention is scientific research. We're not putting enough money into scientific research because we're putting more money into military. We should be putting all of that money plus a whole lot more into scientific research because we actually don't understand much. I know it looks like we understand a lot with all of our technology, but if you look at what we understand about biology, we don't know that much. We're in incredible danger, and we're spending money building weapons and having fights around who gets to build what computer chips. It's ridiculous. So we need to pull way back and start looking at what this means in a deep sense. And I think right now, especially for revolutionaries or people who are progressive, we need to get moving without the governments, because governments have clearly shown that they're too much in the hands of special interests, capitalist interests that aren't going to let us, don't want to do anything. So we need to take the initiative and the lead, which has been happening for years. I mean, I'm feeling optimistic about this, even though we're in quite a dangerous position. But I think my view is people as a whole want to survive. Humanity is going to survive. And we just have to keep on focusing on getting it together. And I hope we do.
I hope we can get it together so we can all stay on Earth and don't have to be living on Mars or on the moon or something like that.
I'm happy to have Elon Musk go to Mars. Let's get rid of him and Bezos.
There's our friend Carol Travis, who was on not too long ago talking about her dad and the Flint strikes back in the old days in the 30s. But Carol's living in North Carolina, and she just sent me an email that brought up an organization called Regenerative Rising. And that would be Regenerative Rising, as it's spelled, .org, if you want to find out more of them. And then when you piqued my interest in this, and I'm always paying attention to some animal disappearing, that kind of thing. I sent you an article by Susan Simard, who made key discoveries on how fungal networks sustain healthy forests, is now pushing logging reform. And that's an article by Susan Kaplan in the Washington Post. We got a couple minutes left, maybe one or two. Why don't you give us some parting shots on what to do?
I think, what I'm interested in, and I think we all need to do, is to figure out how to integrate our political activism with the environmental movement. It should be part of everything that we do. We should not be, making these boundaries. We should be attacking them. And I think part of it is also getting the public to understand that we need citizen scientists. It's not scientists can't go off in a lab and figure out what needs to be done. It needs to happen in the field, and it needs to happen with farm workers and people like us who are in the field, who are living the life. We need to be part of what's going on. We need a different kind of science if we're going to manage to get somewhere, because the kind of science that breaks up everything into small little chunks, it's great for publishing, papers and stuff like that. And it's not that it's, obviously it's yielded a lot of important results, but given our current crisis, we need science to become a lot more public and have a lot more public participation. Just like medicine, it's another thing I'm working on, is something called the Society for Participatory Medicine. We shouldn't have people, healthcare is very much the same. You should be participating in your healthcare. You shouldn't be just sitting back passively while the doctor tells you what they're going to do.
Well, we have to, figure a way to light up a co-evolutionary relationship between the human species and the living planet. And I'm glad you got us going on this. It's something we're going to look at, and I know you're working on a major piece for I think a magazine called Unity.
Yeah, Unity 2022. Unity2022.com. Yeah, we had a revolutionary rag in the 80s. Some you may or may not remember it, but we're trying to remember that one. Yeah, we're older, and we're trying to just come back and provide some new ideas for younger activists. That's one of the things. It's very much in line with what you and Katie and others have been doing for years and years and years.
Well, Ivan Handler, this is great. Do you want to give someone a way to get a hold of you if they want to pursue more discussion with you, et cetera?
Ivan.handler@gmail.com.
Well, you're a wonderful guy, and I love running into you, and I'm glad you send me emails that provoke my thought processes. And you're raising a really important issue, you know, and I went, even after reading some of the stuff that you've been sending, I went looking for an old Coevolution Quarterly T-shirt, but I couldn't find one, and I don't know where mine went to. But I like the idea of you know, people working to save the planet, and you're one of the guys that's on it, and you're reminding the rest of us. So I thank you, and I know you're going to be doing good in the world. So thanks, Ivan.